For most of our lives, we're taught one financial skill, how to save. We're taught to build the pile as high as we can. But then one day the game changes. You reach the top of the mountain and suddenly you have to learn an entirely new skill, how to actually spend that money without the constant fear of running out. It's a massive psychological shift. You've done the hard work of building the pot, but now you face the ultimate puzzle. How do you turn that savings into a paycheck that actually lasts as long as you do? Whether you crave the ironclad security of a guarantee or the freedom of staying in the market, this choice will define the next 30 years of your life. Let's head to the video session and solve the retirement income puzzle.
Hey there, and welcome. So you've worked your entire life to build this nest egg, right? The big question is, how do you turn that pile of savings into a reliable paycheck in retirement? Well, today we're going to break down a really popular strategy that does just that. Let's get into it. Okay, let's just start with the absolute nightmare scenario, the one that probably keeps some of you up at night. You've done everything right, you've saved for decades, you've finally hit that retirement date, and boom, the market tanks. This isn't just a run of bad luck, it's the single biggest financial threat to a new retiree. You know, this danger actually has a name. It's called sequence of returns risk, and it's a fancy way of saying that taking money out of your portfolio right after a big drop can do permanent damage. It just cripples your money's ability to bounce back. The good news? The bucket strategy we're talking about today is designed to be a firewall against this exact problem.
So here's our game plan. We've talked about the big risk. Next, we'll dive into the simple three-bucket solution. Then I'll walk you through how to actually build one for yourself. After that, we'll cover the really important part, how to keep those buckets full. And finally, we'll figure out if this is actually the right strategy for you.
Okay, so let's get into the three-bucket solution. You know, the real magic of this strategy is how simple and intuitive it is. Forget all the complicated financial jargon for a second. At its heart, this is just a really smart way to organize your money based on one simple question: when are you going to need it?
Let's start with bucket number one. We call this one the cash faucet. This bucket is your safety net. It holds about 1 to 5 years worth of your living expenses in the safest stuff you can find. We're talking cash, money market funds, things that won't go down in value. The goal here isn't growth, it's stability. This is what lets you sleep at night when the stock market is going crazy. All right, moving on to bucket number two, the stable reservoir. This one's for your medium-term needs. Think years 5 through 10 of your retirement. Here, we're taking on a little bit more risk to try and get some modest growth, something that'll hopefully beat inflation. This is where you'll find things like high-quality bonds or solid dividend-paying stocks.
And that brings us to the powerhouse of the operation, bucket three, the growth engine. This is for your long-term money. Any cash you won't need to touch for at least a decade. And because you have all that time, you can afford to take on more risk for higher potential returns. This bucket is filled with things like growth stocks and index funds, and its job is to grow big enough to refill the other two buckets for the rest of your life.
Okay, so the theory sounds pretty good, right? But how do we actually put this thing together? Let's switch gears from the what to the how and build one of these systems from scratch, step by step. Honestly, it's easier than you might think. It really just boils down to 3 simple steps. First, you got to figure out how much money you need to live on each year. Second, you fill up bucket 1 with enough cash to cover a few years of those expenses. And third, you just invest the rest of your money into buckets 2 and 3. That's it.
Let's use a real-world example. Say you've got $1 million portfolio, and you figured out you need about $50,000 a year to live comfortably. Well, if you want a 5-year cash buffer in bucket 1, the math is pretty easy. 5 years times 50 grand is $250,000. That money goes into cash. Now you've got $750,000 left to invest.
So what do we do with that remaining $750? Well, let's say you have a pretty standard risk tolerance. You might split it 60-40. That means 40%, or $300,000, goes into bucket 2, your stable stuff like bonds. And the other 60%, $450,000, goes into bucket 3, your growth engine. See? Now every single dollar has a job and a time horizon. Now, this is really, really important. Setting up the buckets is just the first step. The real genius of this strategy is how you manage it over the long haul. This is not a set it and forget it kind of deal. You've got to know how to keep your buckets full.
And this brings us to a huge mistake a lot of people make. You see this quote from Christine Benz at Morningstar? She points out that people think you just spend all the money in bucket 1, then move to bucket 2, and so on. But that's actually not how it's supposed to work at all. The real pro move here is to be opportunistic.
Your strategy changes based on what the market is doing. So when the market's on a tear and stocks are way up, that's when you skim some profits from your growth bucket, bucket 3, and use them to top off your cash bucket. But when the market is down, you do the exact opposite. You leave your stocks alone to give them time to recover, and you live off that cash you saved in bucket 1. This simple move prevents you from selling low, which is a portfolio killer. So how do you keep track of all this? You don't have to check it every day. Most experts just recommend a simple annual checkup. Once a year, you just take a look at your portfolio, see how much cash is left in bucket 1, and then, looking at the market, you decide the smartest way to fill it back up. It's a simple little checklist that keeps the whole machine running.
So, we've covered the what, the how, and the why. Which brings us to the most important question of all. Is this strategy actually right for you? Let's break down some of the pros and cons to help you figure that out. Okay, on the plus side, the absolute biggest win is that it protects you from that sequence risk we talked about. And for a lot of people, that provides incredible peace of mind. But on the flip side, holding a big pile of cash can feel a little too conservative, especially when the market is booming. And yeah, it does take a little bit of annual effort to manage it. Plus, like any financial plan, it's based on your best guesses about the future.
You know, a good way to think about this is to compare it to the famous 4% rule. The 4% rule is basically a static, fixed guideline. You pull out 4% a year, and that's that. The bucket strategy is completely different. It's a dynamic framework. It's a whole system that helps you make smart decisions based on what's actually happening in the real world.
So look, if you're going to walk away with just a few key ideas, let them be these. 1, this strategy organizes your money based on your timeline. 2, it builds a cash buffer so you can ride out the storms. 3, refilling your buckets is opportunistic. You don't just spend them down in order. And maybe most importantly, 4, it's a mental model designed to give you clarity, control, and peace of mind.
And that really brings us to the final thought here. It's so easy to get overwhelmed by all the financial noise out there, but maybe the answer isn't something more complicated. So I'll just leave you with this to chew on. Could something as simple as 3 buckets be the key to bringing some much-needed clarity to your own financial future? Thanks so much for joining me.